This is part 18. Romans is one of those, again, this chapter in particular is another one of those often misunderstood passages. It is, in some ways, people understanding of it is actually the opposite of the point that Paul is trying to make. Because again, this is one of those moments. This is a chapters long argument that he's making about the role of the Torah in the life of bringing believers into the fellowship, particularly Gentiles, and bringing the Gentiles into the synagogue, into and among the people of the Lord. So he expects his readers, the ones that have been reading this is why it's important to sit down and read it in one setting many times, but he expects his readers to have a longer attention span than a goldfish. And most of us don't, right? Especially with the more technology gets involved, the shorter our attention span gets. But he expects his readers to be able to hold on to ideas and concepts and words and points that he has made throughout his letter. And not doing that is why so many misinterpret certain passages, because they remove them. They often pull them out of that larger context and this larger argument, and they treat a verse in an isolated idea. And chapter 7 is bad for that. I was actually going to try to make it a little farther into Romans 7 today, but it didn't happen. So believe it or not, I'm only getting through the first 4 verses. So we might be here a while, so keep that in mind. Yeah, or we might not. It might actually be shorter today. But and I was having to adjust some things even this morning, more so than usual. So I hope it actually all makes sense. But it's important to remember why Paul wrote this letter in the first place. The synagogue that was there in Rome, that had this long history in Rome, was struggling, particularly between the Jewish believers and the Gentile believers. The leadership and authority was an issue, as the Gentiles, the Jews at one point at the end of the 40s had gotten kicked out, and they were gone for 5 years. And those Gentiles had to step up. They had to make do for those 5 years after they were kicked out. And then once they were let back in, the dynamic and the tension persisted between how do we relate to each other? How do we deal and address one another, in particular with how to admit into the synagogue all of these Gentiles who are responding to the good news of Messiah, and they were responding in much greater numbers than even in overwhelming numbers to the Jewish population there. And so he wrote to address their concerns. He wrote to unite them in their shared faith and to strengthen them and strengthen this congregation. Back in chapter 1, he had said, "For I long to see you, so I may share with you some spiritual gift to strengthen you." And when he brings that up, spiritual gift, he's not talking about tongues. He's not talking about all those other types of things. He's talking about the strength for them to be able to come together as one people and survive and grow as a fellowship, as a congregation. Chapter 16, he reiterates it again. He's praying for them, where he says, "Now to the one who is able to strengthen you according to my good news and the proclamation of Yeshua the Messiah." He has wrote all of this to accomplish that goal. And that's why Paul is primarily addressing, the leadership in this synagogue. He's addressing this people so that he can teach and equip them, so they in turn can get, their act together, right? And lead by example, so they can be on the same page. Right? When you have leadership that are not on the same page, how well does it go for an organization? When they're constantly trying to undermine each other, when they're constantly kind of bickering at each other, you're not going to be able to have the success or the growth that you need to have. You're not going to survive. So he's been dealing with a lot of those issues all along. And chapter 7 opens up with those who are the most in charge and who might be the most resistant to change, and all of these Gentiles coming in, the ones who have even the greatest mastery of the Torah, the ones who may even feel like, if we are, their concern was lowering the standards. Their concern was, which chapter 6 dealt with a lot last week, but lowering the standards, not making the Torah a requirement, all their different issues and concerns. So they say, if we keep going down this road, we're actually going to be violating the Torah. And so he is addressing those leaders in verse 1 that have the greatest mastery of the Torah, but who may not realize the mastery the Torah has over them, and even in their walk of faith. He says, "Do you not know, brothers and sisters, for I speak to those who know the law." And who is that? Who are the ones who know the law in this conversation? The Jewish people, right? So he's addressing something specifically to them, that the law is master over a person as long as he lives. And this is actually, this is the TLV. This is a great example of where some of our modern translations make a change or make an addition for inclusivity that actually creates a problem on some level with interpretation. It says brothers and sisters up there, right? And that sounds nice, because we don't, in our modern world, we don't want women to feel left out, as if the scriptures are not addressing them or addressing their concerns or thinking about them. And that's a really nice concept. But in this particular instance, it's not reflecting reality. He's writing to the leadership of this Jewish synagogue in the first century. And if he's writing to the leadership of a Jewish synagogue in the first century, is he going to be addressing any sisters? No. He's not. The leadership was exclusively men. That's not drawing away from any New Testament passage, nothing from Timothy, but they are following the pattern set in the Torah, set from the priesthood, from the Torah, and even from the judges, from all those people who were helping Moses, those men that were appointed over tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands. Right? The word is adelphoi, or delphos. It's brothers. And so he is speaking to his fellow Jewish men who know the Torah, who have grown up in it, been educated in it for generations. And he is acknowledging, their heritage, their importance as leaders in the synagogues, because these are the experts, the masters of the Torah, the tradition. They are the ones who keep everything, in line and from just going crazy all over the place. The ones that everybody comes to ask their opinion and their ruling on things. You even see that in the movie Fiddler on the Roof, right at the very beginning, when everybody approaches the rabbi to ask different questions, right? And he's always supposed to have an answer. Sometimes he makes them up on the spot, you get the impression. But, he is reminding them, in addressing them, of their position, but he's also reminding them that he is one of them. At minimum, he is on their level, and at minimum, he is not to be dismissed. He reminds them that the law is actually their master. They are not over the law. They do not get to change or alter the law as they see fit. That was the whole problem that was coming up in the Middle Ages and such, with the divine right of kings, where they were able to say that the king can do anything and everything he wants, and he cannot be held accountable to any law, that the king is above the law. Y'all familiar with that idea, at least? We've heard it even in recent years and from a lot of our politicians, where they say no one is above the law, right? Not members of Congress, not presidents, not even judges of the Supreme Court. If they break the law, they should be held accountable, just like everybody else, right? Because that happens all the time, right? They never get let off, right? They never get special treatment. Whether they make the laws, whether they enforce the laws, whether they interpret the laws, they're supposed to be under the law. just like everybody else. Whether they get pulled over for drunk driving, fraud, or sexual assault, they should be subject to the law like everybody else. Paul reminds them that not even they are above the law, but that the law is master over a person, including them. They are subject to the Torah too. They are obligated to keep it and live by it. Until when? Until they're dead. Right? Now, can you imagine going into one of our court systems right now? Can you imagine any district attorney bothering to bring new charges, no matter how serious, on somebody who's already buried and dead in the ground? Are they going to bring any new accusations or charges against them? Not really. I mean, can you imagine the how that would go for the district attorney? Says, yes, Your Honor, I would like to make sure that the defendant, Mr. Jones, is never eligible for parole, so I'm going to introduce an additional 5 murder and assault charges that happened yesterday. Now, I realize he died last week. He's already been buried, but his victims deserve to know that he will never be released. What do you think the judge would say to something like that? What are you, stupid? Why would I need to worry about that? Once he's dead, there's no point. And Mr. Jones is not mostly dead, he's all dead. He won't be adding to his list of crimes. Because the greatest punishment that could be done has already been delivered. I mean, that should be pretty basic, right? You're subject to the law so long as you are alive. And he's reminding them of that, simple, basic point. And so he reinforces that point that, the law is master over a person as long as he lives. And so he reinforces it through an illustration about marriage. And marriage is the illustration. It's not really the point. Which some people, that's some of the ways that some people confuse this. But because he is talking to the leadership, he is talking to these Jewish men, he's going to put it in terms that they can most relate to, because most Jewish men, get married. These leaders would have been no exception. Most of them have a wife. Most of them have a family. And most of them would be pretty ticked off if they were told that their wife was with another man. And we sometimes, are you okay with that? We have a phrase for that says, over my dead body, right? It's kind of relating to this right here, to which Paul would say, if you're coming back and saying, are you okay with your wife being with another man? And you say, over my dead body, he says, exactly my point. Right? He says, do you not know, brothers, for I speak to those who know the law, that the law is master over a person as long as he lives. For the married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives. But if the husband dies, she is released from the law concerning the husband. So men, as long as you are alive, you have a claim on your wife, a right to exclusivity that no one else has. And now, it's true that the wife also has those same claims and rights toward her husband. Isn't that true? Of course she does. But he's not really talking generically about spouses, male and female, not marriage in general. He's basically trying to rile these men up a little bit, and activate their defensive, protective kind of husband sense. That's my wife, and she'd better not be looking at anybody else, and nobody had better be looking at her, right? Y'all understand that automatic defense mechanism? Every man who's married should be nodding. I understand that. And if you don't, if he's not nodding, ladies, hit him, because he should understand that. If so, then if she is joined to another man while her husband is living, she will be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is free from the law. So she is not an adulteress, though she is joined to another man. So the husband has the right to be angry or protective. He can complain. He can bring charges. And notice something here that Paul is doing. He is taking the strictest concept of marriage, because he's not even addressing or discussing the concept of divorce, right? He's not even bringing that subject up right now, because that, in his mind, in this argument, that's not even an option. So in this setting that Paul is addressing, where he's being accused of being lax on the law, lax on the Torah, no one can accuse Paul of negating the Torah by being soft on divorce and remarriage. So he's not even bringing up that subject as an option. So they are accusing him of that very thing, of being soft on the Torah in regard to the Gentiles. But he's not going to give them any ammunition in making this point. So he's saying, therefore, the wife is not released so long as he is alive. Following me? But she is free. That the covenant of oath that she took is not broken by any sin of infidelity if her husband has died. The terms have been fulfilled, right? Marriage is between one man and one woman for life. The two become echad, the two become one till death do us part, right? Well, and he's arguing that death has parted. If a life has ended, the covenant has come to its conclusion, and then she is free to enter into a new covenant. If only our culture took marriage and covenant this seriously. But here's the kicker and the twist that really hit me this week in studying this passage. And see if y'all have had this same kind of experience with this passage. Most of the time, when pastors interpret this passage, they encourage people to relate themselves to the wife who has been made free and able to enter into the new covenant. Most of y'all hear it in those terms, right? You're like her. You're like the wife who is now free. But that is actually not true at all. Because he's talking to the men, remember? Paul was trying to provoke their righteous indignation as the husband defending their wife. They are not the wife who lives on without him. They are, in fact, the dead husband. See, therefore, my brothers, you also were made dead to the Torah through the body of Messiah. But which one are they? Are they the wife or are they the husband who's dead? You were made dead. So their position in this story or in this illustration is the husband who's dead. And I never really caught that. I fell into the same path as everything else. You're the dead one in this story. You died with Messiah. You've been buried with him and then raised to do what? Raised to walk in a new way of life. That's the twist. That's the unexpected thing, right? Because that goes back to chapter 6, where he says, do you not know that all of us who are immersed or baptized into Messiah Yeshua were immersed into his death? Therefore, we were buried together with him through baptism, through immersion into death, right? He's already been telling them that you have died. Now, normally being the dead one is a bad thing, right? That's not the outcome we would want. I mean, imagine how it is if you're a struggling actor or actress and you're hired on to some great big movie that they're planning on making 6 or 7 different sequels to it, but you get hired on to be the character that dies in the first few minutes. You're the shark attack victim like in Jaws, or you're the murder victim that Sherlock Holmes is going to come and solve their murder, right? Congratulations, you got the part, but you're not going to be around for very long. Right? Usually that means that your part in the story is over. But again, the twist, because you're dead, you're just as free as the wife. That makes sense? You're just as free as she is. And you may be sitting there thinking, well, that's great. I'm 6 feet underground. My house is a little smaller than it used to be. It's good to know I can always remarry, right? But how can the dead guy remarry? And who's actually going to be willing to marry the dead guy? The twist is, yes, you have died. But what's the other thing? You have also been raised. Do you not know that all of us who were immersed into Messiah Yeshua were immersed into his death? Therefore, we were buried together with him through immersion into death, in order that just as Messiah was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. Yes, you should have died as due payment for your sin, your breaking of the Torah. Those are the terms for breaking Adonai's commandments. You and all of us are the unfaithful servant. But something unexpected has happened that changes everything. The faithful servant has taken our punishment and died in our place, as Isaiah prophesied was going to happen. He says where Isaiah 53, he was pierced because of our transgressions, crushed because of our iniquities. The chastisement for our shalom, our peace, was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. See, we all like sheep have gone astray. We are the unfaithful servant. Each of us is turned to his own way, and so Adonai has laid on him, the faithful servant, the iniquity of us all. Verse 11, as the result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied by his knowledge. The righteous one, my servant, will make many righteous, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion with the great, and he will divide the spoil with the mighty, because he poured out his soul to death and was counted with transgressors. For he bore the sin, he bore the breaking of the Torah of many, and interceded for the transgressors. So the marriage is not over until one of the parties has died, and congratulations, that's you. From verse 1, the Torah was your master, and you were a slave to its terms as one who breaks the Torah, which the terms are death. You were a slave to the breaking of the law. That's chapter 6. But you have died to the breaking of the Torah. You have died to living anomia, without or against the Torah. Now the Torah is no longer your master. That's an important point. Verse 1, it said that I'm speaking to those who know the law, that the law is master over a person as long as they live. But once you have died, it's no longer your master. That's chapter 6. But here's where the error erupts, because so many rejoice with the idea of being free from the Torah. And they do what so many people do in our world today when they think about, or they talk about, in this case, their ex-wife. How many people speak well of their ex and say only good things about them? Like, man, she's not really your ex in this sense. But we tend to badmouth our ex and say how awful and terrible they are. That's what we are doing in our modern world when we are, bad-mouthing the Torah, our former master, that we say, I'm so thankful to be rid of that old ball and chain. That's how people talk about and think about the Torah, as if they can't wait to move on to a new covenant. That covenant was so bad that they couldn't wait to be free of that burden. But here's the deal. Here's the misunderstanding of all of this. I hate to break it to those people who badmouth their ex, the badmouth the Torah. In this marriage, in this covenant, your ex was not the problem. You were the problem. That's sometimes hard to hear. Most people, especially when they're that self-centered and that self-focused, they don't like to hear that they are the ones who are the problem. Remember, we were reading from Hebrews earlier. Because now Yeshua has obtained a more excellent ministry insofar as he is the mediator of a better covenant which has been enacted on better promises. For if that first one had been faultless, there would not have been discourse seeking a second. He was like, ha, there you go. There was so many faults with my ex. I'm so much better off without her. I need to be free to marry another. And that smug self-righteousness that can't even recognize their own issues. Anybody know that type? But then Hebrews hits us with the reality. Or finding fault with who? Is it finding the fault with your ex? No, it's finding fault with them, he says. Behold, the days are coming, says Adonai, when I will inaugurate a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. I hate to break it to you, but you're the reason the marriage didn't work. You're the adulterer. You're the abuser. You're the selfish one. The Torah does not and did not treat any of us badly. The Torah is not bad for you. You just treated your vows to keep the Torah as options. You broke the Torah. And that means that you're the crazy ex who makes everybody else miserable. Or in this case, you're considered dead. And in this great twist of legality, even though you are dead, you are free to be joined to another. Back in Romans, he says, therefore, my brothers, you also were made dead to the Torah through the body of Messiah, so that you might be joined to another, the one who was raised from the dead. This is the point that Paul is trying to get back to. He is expecting you to remember that you have been set free from breaking of the Torah by the death of Messiah, and because he was raised, so are you, and you've been raised to a new master. Romans 6, verse 8 says, now if we have died with Messiah, we believe that we shall also live with him. And we know that Messiah, having been raised from the dead, no longer dies. Death no longer is master over him. And if you have been raised with death being the penalty or the punishment for breaking the Torah, right? So death, the penalty for breaking the Torah, is no longer his master. And yes, in the death of Messiah, you are free from the penalty and the payment and the curse of the Torah, because that's the wages of sin. And by dying and being raised, your nature is what changes. You are free, not from the Torah so much as you are free from yourself and from your nature and your tendency, your brokenness to break the Torah. And you are free to have a new master, a new husband. And there's an important phrase in verse 3. He says, so then if she is joined to another man while her husband is living, she will be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is free from the law, so she is not an adulteress, though she is joined to another man. He is using a word in the context of marriage and the coming together of the two, and it's a word or phrase that he's already used in chapter 6 to describe our connection to Messiah. Verse 5, he says, we have become joined together in the likeness of his death. Certainly we also will be joined together in his resurrection. You'll see it? We have died, and so we are now free to join with him in life. That word, mai, I'm probably saying that wrong. It talks about becoming or coming into existence, receiving, being, coming to pass. You'll see up a little bit higher in the usage category up here, it also talks about to be married to. is how that one is used. Become joined, we have become joined to Messiah. We've shown that joining in our mikvah, being baptized into his name, but we've also been joined to Messiah in his resurrection and life. In this case, we are the bride. And he is who? We are the bride. He is the bridegroom. And he is our new husband. He is our master. And this is where the whole, the modern understanding and interpretation gets it wrong. They see it as a way of getting away from a bad situation, being married to the Torah, so they can be free to marry another. But just remember, in that analogy that he was using, in that illustration he was using, with everything going on in the same rules and the way things work here in this world, for her to be joined to another man, he's probably going to have some of the same problems and issues that the first one did, right? Who died. But you, as the one who died, you're in a better situation. We have died with him to sin. We have died with him to the breaking of the law, the breaking of the Torah, and so we are free to be joined to another. We are free to, as the bride, to be part of the bridegroom. And the Messiah is nothing like anybody else. The Messiah won't be like the first husband. The Messiah's nature is completely different. His nature is not one that breaks the Torah, is it? His nature is one who keeps the Torah, who honors and lives and walks in the Torah. Does he do it just most of the time, or is it all the time? Does he keep the Torah perfectly? He is, in fact, the embodiment of the Torah. He is the living Torah, the word, the memra made flesh. And the purpose of this joining, of coming together, being united to him, is not freedom from the Torah, but freedom to somebody who keeps the Torah, keeps it perfectly. We are joined to someone who perfectly walks out and lives the Torah, and he gives the freedom and the power to better keep the Torah for his bride. Because we'll be following our bridegroom's example, and our bridegroom will not weaken or lessen the standards of righteousness. He doesn't change the standard, he changes us to meet the standard. See how that works? He gives us a new heart and a new spirit. He gives us one who will empower us. We look at this all the time. I will give you a new heart. I will put a new spirit within you. I will remove the stony heart from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my ruach within you, my spirit within you. Then I will cause you to walk in my laws so that you will keep my rulings and do them. So in having died and being raised and free to join another, rather than getting further away from the Torah, we're actually becoming closer to it. Because it becomes a part of us in a way that it wasn't the same. It wasn't before we came to Messiah, even for those who grew up in it. Because they were still breaking the Torah. And back in Hebrews chapter 8, where he quotes from the Septuagint, he quotes Jeremiah on the new covenant. For finding fault with them, he says, behold, the days are coming, says Adonai, when I will inaugurate a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. And it will not be like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, for they did not remain in my covenant. Again, that's Septuagint language. And I did not care for them, says Adonai. So it's not going to be the same. Something is going to be different about this new covenant. says, "For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Adonai after those days," says Adonai. "I will put my Torah into their mind, and upon their hearts I will write it, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people." Are the terms any different? Is the Torah something completely different or radically new or redefined? No. The same Torah that had previously existed, where he was constantly asking them, calling upon them to think about it when they sit, when they rise, and write it on their hearts in the past, because it was on the outside and they needed to put it on the inside. It's like, well, now I'm going to fulfill that promise. I'm going to take what I've asked you to do back here, and I'm going to put it where it has always belonged, in here. I'm going to take the same Torah and write it on your heart. And that's the change. That's the change. Again, rather than being further away from the Torah in this passage, you are closer to it. You are held to its standards. You may be free from the destiny of it, the penalty of breaking it, because your Redeemer has paid for it already. But and here's the thing, for the Gentile who is coming to faith in Messiah, who is embracing Yeshua as their Savior, the Gentile coming to that, you are being united to the one who perfectly keeps the Torah, and the life he lives is the life that you are called to walk in. Right, so is the standard for the Gentile, is it being lowered or is it being elevated? The standard for the Gentile is being elevated. And for the leadership, for the Jewish men that were there in this synagogue, he's holding them to a even higher standard. And he's reassuring them that you are not violating the Torah by believing in Yeshua as the Messiah, because he's the one that the Torah has been talking about and pointing to all along. For the Jewish person, you are not violating Torah. You're not abandoning your Jewishness by believing in Yeshua, even though that's what much of church history has tried to make you do. Rather, you are establishing and upholding the Torah, because you're fulfilling your role in bringing that Torah, being a light to the Gentile. Because Messiah, when you see him, when you know him, because Messiah brings with him the perfect Torah. That's even Jewish commentary and understanding, that Messiah comes and teaches new and deeper dimensions of the Torah, enabling a perfect observance of all of the commandments. The Messiah makes that happen in his people. And even Yeshua's own teaching confirms this with an interesting connection. In Matthew 5:18, and the word that we looked at a little earlier, genomahi, where he says, "Again I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or serif will ever pass away from the Torah, until all things come to pass." All things are fulfilled. All things are joined together. All things are that genomahi. He uses the same word. And the purpose of this joining together of this people, together with Messiah, and bringing about this perfect Torah, is so that God may reap a glorious harvest. Right? Romans 7:4, "Therefore, my brothers, you also were made dead to the Torah through the body of Messiah, so that you might be joined to another, the one who was raised from the dead, in order, for this purpose, that we," and the "we" is both Jew and Gentile all of a sudden, "in order that we together might bear fruit for God." The New Living Translation calls this a harvest of good deeds, and we bear fruit for God. What kind of fruit is he talking about here? Now that you are redeemed, now that you are saved by faith in Messiah, now that you are slaves, as he says in verse 6, you are slaves to righteousness. Right? When sin You're no longer slaves to sin. You're no longer slaves to breaking the Torah. When that is no longer your master, you are then able to produce fruit or produce works of righteousness as defined by the Torah. Now that you are slaves to obedience, now that you are in chapter 6, you are a tool of righteousness. Now you can produce fruit. Now you can bear fruit that gives him honor and glory. That's what is now available for the first time. Even Yeshua promised that. In John 15, he says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you. I selected you so that you would go and produce fruit, and your fruit would remain," or fruit that will last, fruit that will have an eternal value, fruit that will not be destroyed. You know, again, the New Living calls that harvest of good deeds. And Paul himself spoke about a life dedicated to Messiah, dedicated to one that will last, that will survive. It says it in 1 Corinthians 3, he says, "For no one can lay any other foundation than what is already laid, which is Yeshua the Messiah. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, and precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become clear. For the day of his coming, the day of the Lord, the day of Adonai, that day will show it, because it is to be revealed by fire, and the fire itself will test each one's work and what sort it is. If anyone's work is built on the foundation," and what's the foundation? The foundation is Yeshua the Messiah. If anyone's work built on that foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss. He himself will be saved, but as through fire. The only fruit that will last, the only fruit that will endure, the only fruit that will that we might bear fruit for God, that he is talking about in chapter 7, verse 4, is the one that is a result of the change of life that Messiah has brought to us. Only in Messiah will we produce fruit that will last. Only in Messiah will that harvest of righteousness come. And some of that fruit will be other disciples, other people who believe, children of God, born from above, because they were faithful to share about Messiah. Because they were faithful, you can be fruitful for God in Messiah, to be that light to the world, light to the nations, so that more, I mean, he's been talking about marriage this whole time. What usually comes through a fruitful marriage in most cases? Children, right? So whoever did receive him, those trusting in his name, to these he gave the right to become children of God, not born of a bloodline, nor of human desire, nor of man's will, but of God. That's also the kind of fruit he wants to see produced in us. And so to those who know the Torah, he's not lowering the standards. He is upholding and raising them. And they will be keeping and honoring the Torah by admitting and training all of these crazy Gentiles who don't know what they're doing. Have you been there before? I know I have. Admitting and training these Gentiles who are coming to faith in Messiah and having that same kind of saving faith, just like Abraham. That is what will strengthen this synagogue in Rome. That is what will bring them together to meet the hardships and persecutions and things that are in the future. And without that, it will be hard for them to survive. But his intention is to bring all of us, both Jew and Gentile, together so that a great harvest can be revealed unto him. Amen.